Hello and welcome to ITV News Central for the East Midlands. On the programme tonight, a woman from Derby whose father died from contaminated blood products backs calls for criminal charges to be considered.
The inquiry might be coming to its conclusions with its final statements, but the fight's not finished.
Good evening. A woman from Derby whose father died from contaminated blood products is backing calls for criminal charges to be considered. Today is 4 years on from the launch of the inquiry, and as it draws to an end, closing submissions are being heard.
Katie Walford's father, David Hatton, was one of thousands of haemophiliacs given blood infected with HIV and hepatitis C during the 1970s and 80s. Katie says for victims and families, it isn't the end of their fight for justice, as our health correspondent Nancy Cole reports.
It's not been 4 years. It's been decades of fighting.
Katie's father, David, died when she was 10 years old. He contracted HIV, then hepatitis, after receiving blood from the NHS during treatment for haemophilia. For over 2 decades, Katie's family have wanted answers as to what happened. Now, 4 years after an inquiry was set up to do just that, it begins its closing weeks.
I can't thank them enough for allowing my dad's story and my family's story and so many other people's story to be told still. The inquiry might be coming to its conclusions with its final statements, but the fight's not finished. The fight's definitely not finished.
The inquiry was set up to examine how men, women and children were given infected blood products imported from the US in the 1970s and 80s. About 3,000 people are believed to have died in what's been described as the biggest treatment disaster in NHS history. Last October, eligible victims and spouses began to receive compensation payments from the government, but children and parents of victims are still waiting to be acknowledged.
There are still many people who are not being recognised for their pain and their strife, and my heart goes out to those individuals who have got their compensation. I hope people realise that the fight isn't over. There are still so many people that are still left in the dark.
We know that many victims, many families are now looking and calling for some kind of prosecution. So you part of that?
100%. The reality is my dad, through medical means, was murdered. And the people who are responsible, they need to be held accountable.
What follows the inquiry remains to be seen. It's clear for families it won't be the end of their fight. Nancy Cole, ITV News, Derby.
The inquiry was set up following decades of campaigning by those affected by the scandal. For years, their voices went unheard as authorities constantly dismissed their concerns. When Jeremy Hunt, as former Health Secretary, gave evidence, he described it as institutions and the state closing ranks around a lie. Well, let's cross to our political correspondent, Alison Mackenzie, who's been watching today's final submissions. And Alison, what was said?
Well, firstly, a very powerful summing up by the family barrister to the inquiry chair, just to say the inquiry chair isn't there to determine whether there should be a criminal or a civil charge. He's there to write the report, make the findings and to make recommendations. He heard very bluntly from the family barrister that this was a scandal that was avoidable. He said thousands have died, lives affected for the worse because, quite simply, of a brutal and unacceptable and unnecessary practice. He said it arose from a combination of pharmaceutical companies' greed, they got money for the blood products, and unsafe practices. He said the skipping of key safety steps for these blood products, and as the governments over the years, he told the inquiry chair that there was insufficient regulation, foresight or planning. As for clinicians, he said that they were blinded to the obvious risks and dangers of these blood products, and he wanted wants all these to be in the chair's findings. He summed it up this way.
A theme running through our submissions and those of all the other core participants who have given you written submissions for the infected and the affected is that individuals have been stripped of their dignity. They have been forced to lead lives they did not choose. Our theme is that governments have over the years delayed, denied, and have degraded those who are infected and affected by how they have subsequently been treated.
Alison, this story does of course affect many families. What are their lawyers saying today?
Well, yes, so many barriers have been put up in the decades that have passed, so they're pleased the inquiry happened. How might the government take it? We took the views of the family lawyer, Des Collins.
They've made a lot of good noises. They've made apologies where that was regarded as necessary both by them and by the victims. But what we haven't seen in the past 4 years, and still haven't seen really, is any concrete reaction by the government as to how they are going to react to this report when it comes out later this year, in the form that we believe it will be in.
Well, we know that some interim payments have been made to victims. I've spoken to one of them today. The government statement to us tonight, it says victims of the infected blood scandal have suffered enough. The government fully accepts the moral case for compensation and has paid interim compensation to those eligible. It goes on, this was only the first step. Work continues to prepare for the conclusion and recommendations of the infected blood inquiry later this year. But the families say to us it's not just about money, it's about so much more.
Alison, thank you very much.